Hello and thank you for tuning into this video. It's a video that I came up with to give people the information they need to know about their options from converting a student visa to an Australian permanent residency. There is an actual pathway to do that, whether you are in Australia or whether you are outside of Australia. And that's what I want to go through today for the next 30 to 45 minutes or so. So thank you for joining me. So my name is William, um, and I'm a registered migration agent. So I need to bring you through this disclaimer that although I'm legally allowed to give you migration advice, that the information we're going to go through today in this video is general information only and is not and should not be considered as individual migration advice for each and every one of you as the viewers. If you do not agree to this disclaimer, please stop watching the video now. So who is this presentation for? So this presentation is for students currently studying in Australia. It's primarily for them because it allows you to continue studying there or continue to work there and ultimately get permanent residency, or the parents of the students who usually are financing all of these fees. So you could be a recently graduated Australian graduate, or you are still studying there, you're going to graduate soon or sometime in the near future. The other type of people that this presentation is for engineering graduates, specifically engineering graduates outside of Australia, who are under the age of 31 years old and would have graduated in the last 2 to 3 years. Either way, for whichever group you fall into, your goal is that you'd like to work in Australia, ultimately converting your whatever visa you have, or if you don't have a visa, getting permanent residency in Australia, allowing you to live and work there. So a quick introduction to our company, Austral Migration Consultancy. We're a full-service migration agency with 3 migration agents in-house. So my number is one of those. You can check it out on the MARA website. We have offices in Australia, Malaysia, and Singapore. There are 2 offices in Malaysia, a small one in Melbourne, and the one that I'm based out of, which is in Singapore. We have a registered migration agent or a lawyer per office. And in the last 5 years of operations, we've had about 1,000 visas approved, primarily for skilled migration. And we do a lot of business and investor visas as well. So why do people use registered migration agents? Well, the first thing is that we are trained in migration law, regulations, and the ever-changing requirements that happen on a federal and state level. So our job is to stay updated with all of these changes. And the changes happen multiple times in a year, which most people don't realize. The application process is complicated and time-consuming for an individual to keep track of as they, live their day-to-day lives of going to work, taking care of the family, and so on. There are a lot of paperwork and document collection involved, and it can be time-consuming and quite complicated. Also, we're governed by an Australian government entity called MARA. It provides us with a code of conduct that guides how we are meant to act as migration agents. And if you have any issues with any registered migration agent, you can actually make a complaint to MARA, who will take it into account, and they can take action against you as in the registered migration agent. So these are just a couple of the reviews that we've had on our Google business pages from some of our clients. We've had, hundreds and hundreds of clients in the last couple of years. So first thing, what is skilled migration? Because ultimately it leads to that. Permanent residency in Australia is typically by way of either family migration, such as a partner visa or child visa, but more commonly it's through skilled migration. So that's what permanent residency in the context of what we are talking about today involves. So permanent residency through skilled migration. Skilled migration is a points-based system. The minimum threshold is 60 points. 60 points indicates to the Australian government that you are readily employable, because the skilled migration system is meant to fill gaps or shortages in the skilled pool of workers in Australia. It's based on supply and demand of occupations, so it's relatively fair, and it fills occupations that are typically highly skilled. You don't need a job offer to obtain a permanent residency, which is different to quite a few countries. You don't even need to be onshore. You can apply, and most people do. Most people apply from outside of Australia. So the general requirements for skilled migration include being over the age of 18 and under the age of 45. So the second you turn 45, you've actually exceeded the age limit for skilled migration. Your occupation must be on one of two skilled migration lists, the MLTSSL, medium or long-term strategic skills list, or the short-term skilled occupation list. You need to sit an English language test, score a certain mark, and you need to finally receive something called an invitation to apply from the Department of Home Affairs, which governs the immigration department. You need to pass health and character checks, and sometimes, depending on your occupation and depending on the demand for that occupation, you may need to be nominated by a state. The skilled points test, the table looks somewhat like this. You get different points based on age, English ability, qualifications, and so on. And through this points test is how you add up to try and get that 60 points threshold and above. Of course, the more points you have, the better, because it means that you can get selected faster. In essence, this is the visa application process. It starts at the assessment stage where your occupation is assessed, your qualifications are assessed. You submit an expression of interest to allow your documents to be considered. You may need a state application, you receive an invitation to apply, and finally your PR is granted. Now, we've oversimplified it a bit through what I've just described, but it is a multi-stage process, and typically this stage or this process takes anywhere from 12 to 18 months or longer, depending on many factors for each and every one of you. So that's the skilled migration process. Now, what can you do with a permanent residency? You can live and work anywhere in Australia indefinitely. That means that if you fly to Australia and you never leave the country, you can live there forever. You can start a business, you can study at a lower cost than international students. For children, they would go to the public schooling system for free. You get access to Medicare, which is the public healthcare system. That's also primarily free for almost most things. And medication is subsidized by the government. Most medication is anyway. Social welfare benefits like childcare rebates and help for sending your children to childcare. So the method that I'd like to talk to you today, which is specific for students or parents of students, which I've mentioned earlier, what does this method allow? So the method allows, it's specifically for current students or recent graduates of Australia, and it allows you to continue staying in Australia after your student visa expires. So some people don't realize that you can apply for certain visa types that allow you to stay in Australia after your student visa expires. And some people also don't realize that there is a pathway to permanent residency through that visa type and subsequent visa types. And the problem with it is that people don't even know that it's possible, and B, it's a very time-sensitive process. So this method allows you to stay in Australia for up to 22 to 24 months after your student visa expires. You are allowed to work in Australia and in pretty much every state. You can still fly out of Australia to visit home, go on holiday for any festive seasons, and it really does give you a head start on getting your permanent residency. Well, it also allows for students who are not in Australia as well, which I'll go through a bit later. But the one that I specifically shown on screen is primarily for students who are there or about to graduate, and also for those students who graduate in engineering in the last few years and are overseas. Well, they'd be allowed to do the same thing as well, except since they're overseas, they can't just pick up and go to Australia immediately. But once the first stage of the method gets you that first visa, then you'll be allowed to go there. So how do students qualify? And this set of slides, next few slides, are for those students who are currently in Australia or recently graduated and they're on an active student visa for Australia. So number one, you hold a current Australian student visa, like I just mentioned. you've studied or will study in Australia full-time for 2 years. So that's very important, full-time for 2 years. You've studied in regional Australia, which is optional, such as South Australia, Tasmania, regional Victoria or New South Wales, etc. But it's not a must. You must be able to get a good English score of IELTS band 7 and higher, or PTE score 65 and higher. And in most cases, realistically, you're going to need IELTS band 8 and PTE score 79. Now there's OET and TOEFL as well, which are other English tests, but primarily most people take these two, which are the most popular ones. So you can study any one of these fields if you're currently in Australia or recently graduated: engineering, accounting, architecture, nursing, dental, computing, and if you're overseas, you can qualify for this slightly different visa type. If you've graduated in engineering, that's the first thing. You graduated less than 2 years ago. You're under 31 years old. And your university must be accredited under the Washington Accord. Now, the Washington Accord is an accord which recognizes degrees in multiple countries as equivalent to each other, but more importantly, as equivalent to an Australian graduate degree or Australian bachelor's degree in engineering. Again, you're going to need a good English score. IELTS band 7 and higher, PTE score 65 and higher. And like I said in the earlier slide, you're realistically going to need an IELTS band 8 or PT score of 79, which, although sounds quite difficult for those people, especially for if you're parents of the students listening and thinking, oh my goodness, that's a very high English score. But let's face it, a lot of the students, they're students, so all they've been doing for the last few years is studying. So it's just another test. But before I move on, I'd like to go back to the list here. So there are more occupations which I haven't included here, which people can qualify through as well, like actuary and certain doctors and pilots and so on. But there's a very long list, but these are the main ones. If you'd like to know more about some of the others, you can contact us later on. All right. So continuing on, so how does this method work? So first, you have to qualify either onshore, as in Australia, based on the requirements I mentioned, or offshore if you're an engineering graduate on the Washington Accord. Now, what the method does is it applies for various subclasses of visa at the same time, and it's very precise timing of the application because certain visas can only be applied or granted while you're in Australia. Some will be granted whether you're in Australia or outside of Australia, and so on. But if you apply for the wrong visa at the wrong time, in the wrong place, the visa can get rejected. So, things like your location and having something called bridging visa options. So for those students or those of you who are still in Australia on a student visa, so what this method allows is once you've graduated and you get the next visa type, which will be probably for you a 485 visa, then while that visa is being decided, you will be given something called a bridging visa. And a bridging visa allows you to live and most of the time work in Australia and continue staying there until that visa is granted, which then gives you another 18 months or so. So you see, where you are when you apply is very important, because if you apply for the visa offshore, then you don't get bridging visa options. And if you grant it and you're in the wrong place, they can reject the visa as well. So what we do with this visa method is we apply for the subclass 476 or 485, followed closely by the next most suitable visa at that point in time. So what that means is the visa types for 189, 190, 489 are all visas that are for skilled migration. But the thing is, applying for them, they get selected. People get selected for those visas at different point scores at different times of the year. So you have to know when and how and factor your timing in so that they all match. So for example, most people don't realize that an IELTS score is only valid for maximum of 2 or 3 years. So if you try to use your original IELTS or PTE score when you first went over to Australia, or if you've taken it offshore for any reason and you try and use that score, it's invalid, and so on. So this method works by first a graduate visa, which is 485 or 476, followed by the next most suitable class of visas. So what we do is we monitor the point score to know when to finalize your application, which is very important because if you're in Australia, it will allow you to continue staying on even after your graduate visa expires. But the timing has to be right. You also need to see if a state is open to sponsoring you. And there are lots of states open to sponsoring lots of different occupations, but not all at the same time. So sometimes of the year, different states are closed, different states are open. And keeping track of all these states and which occupations are open and what are the requirements for each individual state is very difficult. You have to prepare the correct documents ahead of time and not last minute, because for example, it can take 25 working days for police clearance. It can take 3 months for an assessment. So things like that have to be factored in. If you start the application too late, by the time it comes to submit the details, your visa might have run out. So we have to keep track of validity periods and the subclass specific skills assessments. We have to factor in where you are so that when your bridging visa is approved, you're in the right place. You can't apply for the bridging visa outside of Australia because that will invalidate many things. And then we have to keep track of when a permanent or provisional visa is approved. So each of them has slightly different conditions, requirements, where you are, what you can do, and so on. So our method is a combination of all the factors I've mentioned, but ultimately it's the aim. The aim is to get you permanent residency or provisional residency, which ultimately ends in permanent residency. What are the common mistakes people make when they try to apply for different Australian visa subclasses themselves? So a very common one is that the application is for the wrong visa type. You may think, oh, there aren't that many visa types. Actually, you'd be wrong. There are over 100 visas available for migration to Australia in different forms. There's even, there's even like refugee visas, parent visas, child visas, and so on. And applying for the wrong visa type is not as difficult as it sounds like. Applying from the wrong location, a bridging visa cannot be applied for offshore. So if you leave Australia and then you apply for the bridging visa, it would be rejected. That's a very simplistic example. You could apply for the wrong assessing authority. There are many assessing authorities for all of the occupations that people graduate with or people are working with. And I'll give you a very good example. We had a prospect come in, husband and wife, and the wife applied for, she just took her resume, converted it, applied for 2 different assessing authorities. One was the correct one was the wrong one. Both came back as failed. And if you do not have justification to why you submitted the wrong thing, that's it. That's the final decision. So if you'd like to change your occupation or your qualifications and you apply to the same assessing authority again in the future, they will say, unless you have new proof to invalidate the previous result, we cannot make any further decisions. And the assessing or the assessment for your occupation is the most important step of the entire process. If you can't get past that step, you can never qualify for permanent residency or provisional residency through skilled migration. If you leave Australia on the wrong visa type, your visa is cancelled. And there are laws in place that may prevent you from applying for another visa type. So very, very important. Claiming the wrong points. This happens a lot. People claim the wrong points for skilled migration when the Department of Immigration or Department of Home Affairs ask you to prove that you have those points and you can't. They will fail you after taking all of your visa fees. And you can be construed as having lied on your application, which puts a ban on you ever being able to apply again. So it's a very serious mistake. Collecting documents too soon or too late. The process is quite time sensitive at different parts of the process. And if you leave your document collection for too late, then your visa might actually expire or lapse before your next visa kicks in. And if you're in Australia at the time of doing that, then you are technically there illegally and you can be subject to removal and again, potentially never being able to apply for skilled migration ever again in the future. So what if you make a mistake? Common things are visa refusals, having to leave Australia immediately. Your visa fees are non-refundable, so they'll take that from you. If you stay in Australia illegally, affects future visa applications. They may ban you from applying or put a grace period of 2-3 years, and you can be physically removed or deported from Australia, depending on how severe your stay is illegally. So most of important, it's a waste of time and money. It's not cheap to process visas. Visa application fees are there set in place to what the Australian government values those visa types. But most importantly is the time. It can take 12 to 18 months. You could have been in Australia for 18 months working on a graduate visa or the 476 visa, and suddenly you have to leave. So that's almost 2 years of your life wasted. So if you pay for the wrong assessing authority, or IELTS runs out, assessment results run out, visa fees paid for wrong visa subclasses, these are all examples of where you waste time and money. So how can we help? So Austral has been doing this for 5+ years now, approaching 6. We've had over 1,000 visas approved. So this is all we do. Our bread and butter is independent general skilled migration to Australia, and also all the requirements involved of it. So we know what it takes to get people who are offshore, especially who are from Southeast Asia, and for those who are onshore to apply for the right visa subclasses to get that permanent residency. So what we do is we apply for the correct visa in the correct order, and that's very important. We have 3 in-house migration agents, like I mentioned, to monitor and advise in the process, and we have an entire team of operational staff. So the operational staff right now, there's 2 teams of multiple people, and there are a lot of eyeballs on any given application at any one time. On top of that, we have 3 in-house migration agents, which is one of the higher numbers in the region. And when I say we're in-house, we are based in the respective offices. We don't fly in and out of Australia for any reason. We are based in the offices mentioned. So we advise of your chances of qualifying. So no point applying if you don't qualify. So if you don't qualify, we will tell you outright that we cannot take you on as a client because you do not qualify. And if we take people on as a client who don't qualify, we risk our licenses, our migration agent licenses through MARA. And so we're very protective of that license because that license represents our business, represents our bread and butter. We advise on the location and timing of applications. So where you can be, where you're not allowed to be, and when is the best time to apply. So all of these is through our experience. We've processed so many people. We know the cycles in any given year, any given financial year, any given time of the year where the Australian Immigration Department may be going through changes and so on. Also, we submit documents on your behalf. We submit to the assessing authorities, Department of Home Affairs. We submit the correct documents, valid documents, and we can even certify a lot of documents if needs be, because some documents can only be certified by prescribed people in Australia, such as an Australian registered lawyer. Now, outside of Australia, there aren't many Australian registered lawyers just hanging around. However, we do have one in-house, and he's a registered migration agent and lawyer, and we can use him to certify documents if needs be. Of course, we prevent wasted time, money, and most importantly, visa refusals, because they have a very big impact on what we do. And what do we do? What is this service that we're proposing? And the service is called a student, whether you're onshore in Australia or offshore overseas. It's the student to PR visa pathway service. We limit it to about 20 students per semester. The main reason for that is because it's very time sensitive, so it takes a lot of monitoring to make sure we get it right across those 18 months. And we can't take on any more than 20 students per semester. Australia has two 2 semesters, so that's 40 students a year, because the rest of our because we do not want to risk having the operations people overwhelmed with monitoring more than this many students. And we've calculated 20 students is the most we will be comfortable with handling at any one time, because we will be dedicating resources and a specific team to this service. So it's a dedicated student pathway to permanent residency visa service, an operations team. Applications can actually start immediately if you fulfill the criteria mentioned, even if you haven't graduated, because there are documents which you can start applying for first in preparation for when you do graduate. So you can start this pretty much immediately, unless you've just started studying and you've got like 4 years to study, 4 years more to study, but you're very welcome to still come and find out how it works so that you know what you will be getting into when the time comes, because it's all about timing. Timing is important. Only qualified candidates will be accepted. And like I mentioned earlier, the reason for that is if you do not qualify, you do not qualify. There's really no way around it. It's not, there's no other things you can do except what has been laid out in the Australian migration legislation. And it's applying for the correct visa subclasses for you at the correct time. So we apply for multiple visas for you at the right time concurrently, which most people will not be able to handle. So the 485, 476, 189, 190, 489, all of these visa types can actually be applied for at the same time. And you have to see which one allows you to live and work in Australia at any one time, and where you can be, and we will advise you where you are allowed to be at any given time throughout the process. Also, the initial consultation is free, meaning that if you'd like to find out more to see if you qualify, to see what the visa and application costs are, the timeline, location, and recommended visa types, it's completely free. So you will be meeting one of the consultants or one of the migration agents, depending who is available at that time, to go through your details. But like I said, if it's very obvious that you do not qualify, unfortunately, we won't be able to see you. So you'd have to fulfill the criteria laid out. So for example, if you are outside of Australia and you graduated 7 years ago in engineering, you may qualify for skilled migration. So please submit your details there, but you wouldn't qualify for this student visa to permanent residency service. So we will need to collect details from you and consult with you on this free consultation. There are limited slots available because, like I said, we can only take 20 people at one time. So once those slots are filled up, we won't be able to take any more people. So if you'd like to book a slot, please go to the website that you see on screen. So that's australmigrate.com/student-pr-pathway. Fill in the form that you see. Please select the office which is closest to you, because that makes things a lot easier. Fill in the details as complete as you can, because the more information that we have, the better. And we will prioritize people who fill in as much information as the people who fill in more information will be serviced first versus the people who leave gaps in the information. So please go to the website today, have a look through that. I hope to see you soon, either myself, one of our consultants in one of our offices, or one of our other migration agents. Hope to see you soon. Thank you for your time, and I will see you in one of these consultations. All right, thank you.